On June 1st, Dad and I went to the airport, put on our masks, jumped on a big plane, and then a small plane to arrive in St. George, Utah. The views right out of the airport were beautiful, and the mountain got even more dramatic as we drove to Zion National Park. After stopping at the grocery store, we arrived at Springdale for our first Airbnb. Our home was a modern condo with a big bed and beautiful patio with a view of the mountains.
We woke up early our first day in Zion and took a shuttle to the grotto to walk the Angel's Landing Trail. Even from the base of the trail, the view was beautiful. The hike was about 3 miles long with an elevation gain of 1,000 feet. It was challenging, especially through all the switchbacks. But we snapped a picture along the way and found some caves and rocks. The view from the top was spectacular. Eventually, we hiked up to Scout's Lookout, where we finished our peanut butter and jelly sandwiches while enjoying the 360-degree view.
Afterwards, we got shuttled over to the Narrows, which is the narrowest section of the Zion Canyon, with the Virgin River flowing through it. The wildlife doesn't seem to mind the hikers. The chipmunks were quite friendly too. After walking a 30-minute paved trail, the hike moved to the river. Luckily, we rented water shoes and hiking sticks, which helped because the rocks were slippery.
I think we walked 10 miles today, so we're both pretty tired.
The thing that I really most enjoyed about the entire 10 miles of the hike was that it was really peaceful because it was so high. There wasn't really any car noises because we were far away from the roads. On Wednesday, we drove through the 1-mile Zion Mount Carmel tunnel to the east side of the park. There, we hiked 7.3 miles on the East Mesa Trail to Observation Point.
The view at Observation Point was the best view we'd seen yet, surrounded by mountains. Many of these sandstone cliffs are over 2,000 feet tall, and in building terms, that's about 200 stories tall.
And on the way back, I was surprised by a cow walking down the trail. Thursday, we drove through the west side of Zion to get to Lamb's Knoll to do a half day of mountain climbing with Mark from Zion Mountaineering School.
Mark showed us how to tie a figure-8 follow-through knot and belayed us on 3 different climbing routes. The climbing was challenging, especially the last route, which went about twice as high as the first 2.
Mark also took us to a nearby slot canyon where we had to turn sideways to shimmy our way through.
After climbing, we drove to our next Airbnb near Bryce Canyon in a city called Panguitch, at 6,600 feet above sea level.
The house is quite spacious and cozy. We each have our own bedrooms, and they have a game room that we took full advantage of. Friday morning, we drove down Highway 12 to arrive at Bryce Canyon. We parked at Sunset Point and we were amazed by the forest of limestone hoodoos which were created by erosion over millions of years.
We then hiked down into the canyon along the Navajo Loop and Queen's Garden Trail. The trail brought us through a maze of limestone, often through tunnels and switchbacks.
Eventually, the loop brought us back up out of the canyon. Before heading home for the day, we drove over to Inspiration Point, where we found the best overlook of the day.
Saturday morning, we rented a 2-seat ATV and drove it around the trails in the area. We saw a few gazelles and cows along the way. Eventually, we stopped at the end of the trail to eat lunch and enjoy the view.
It felt a little like riding a roller coaster, but a bit scarier because Dad was driving it. We drove back to our home and played some foosball. Sunday, we drove to the top of this mountain. It doesn't seem like much, but the Bryan Head overlook is at 11,307 feet.
Up that high, it was really cold, so we huddled inside the lookout to keep warm. Here was the view of the Dixie National Forest from up the top.
Afterwards, we drove into the Cedar Breaks National Monument, where we stopped at a few overlooks.
At Point Supreme, we ran into a park ranger that taught us about how the basin was a body of water 60 million years ago. The view from here was beautiful.
We finished up the day with a short hike in the Dixie National Forest called the Arches Trail. We also had some lunch before heading back home.
And that's pretty much the end of our Utah trip.
Yep.
What'd you enjoy the best?
Probably the ATVing.
That was crazy.
It was bumpy. It was just really enjoyable.
I think my favorite hike was still the Angel's Landing Trail, like the first hike that we did, because there were so many good viewing spots, and up at the top, it was just amazingly high.